Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today I'm going to go over how I made a dark magic Sabertooth. My idea for this piece was to make something that would kind of look like a Disney villain. You know how most Disney villains that have magic have like green glowy magic? Well, I wanted to kind of emulate that green glowy effect with this piece. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so we're going to start with the sewing of our Sabertooth's body. So right here I have the main side piece of our body. So I've got it broken up to where I'm going to use two different colors for this. So the mane and a little tuft of fur under the arm is going to be this neon green, and then the rest of the body is going to be a black. Also, to make the inside parts of the legs, I'm just going to cut them off of this pattern. So the other pattern pieces that you're going to need is you're going to need a belly piece, a strip for the tail, and then the end of the tail. I'm going to have the end of the tail match the mane, so we're going to have that a neon green as well. Okay, so I've been kind of doing this a lot lately, and I think it's mainly because I like working with the softer fabrics. The main problem with the softer fabrics, though, is it's really hard to sew them on the sewing machine. So what we're going to do right here is I've got a plain white piece of fabric, and I've got all my patterns drawn on it, and I've got it on top of the fabric that we're going to actually use for the body. So this is kind of like a backing for our soft fabric, so it's a lot easier to put everything together. So basically, I'm just going to take my sewing machine and I'm going to sew these two layers of fabric together by following all the lines that I have drawn out on the white fabric. After that, I'm going to end up cutting out all of my different pieces and we can start sewing everything together. I think the first thing I'm going to start on is going to be the tail because it's super easy and we can just get it out of the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the two tufts of the end of the tail and we're going to sew down one side. After those two are connected, we're going to end up sewing this to the body of the tail. So we're going to connect these two together and then we can fold this in half and sew down the whole side, closing it up. And then we just have to flip it right side out, and if you want to stuff it you can, but you don't need to because it's kind of a thin tail. Now we're going to take our body piece and our manes and we're going to end up sewing the manes onto the sides of the body. So we're just going to go along these lines. Now I'm going to take that little tuft of fur that I was talking about earlier and I'm going to sew it under the arm. So I'm just going to sew it right here in place. Okay, now we can take the inside parts of the legs and we're going to sew them to the legs that are on the sides of the body. So I'm just going to be going down the front of all the legs. We're not going to sew down the back. After that, we're going to take our belly piece, and I also have this in the neon green fabric because I want the mane to continue down the belly. So I'm going to end up taking this and then we're going to sew the two sides of the body right to it. After you have all that put together, you're going to have something like this. Okay, so that's basically how we're going to sew the body of our Sabertooth. Next, I'm going to be making a pair of gothic, kind of creepy wings for it. I thought this would add to the theme of being dark magic. So to make the wings, I ended up drawing out a simple pattern and I cut out a green layer of fabric. This is going to be the very middle of our wings. We're kind of making a sandwich. We're going to have 3 layers of fabric total with this piece. After I used my pattern to cut out the middle piece, I did alter it a little bit because I wanted some spikes on it, and then I also drew out where all the little finger pieces of the wing are going to be, along with some scales. Okay, so I'm going to take our altered pattern and I'm going to use the outline of it to cut out the pieces that are going to go on the top of the wing and the bottom of the wing. So each wing is going to need a top and a bottom, so we're going to cut out 4 pieces in total. Okay, now we're going to start pinning our layers together. So make sure that the black fabric that's going to be on both sides has the fur on the outside. So we're going to pin those layers together and then we're going to take our pattern, or we're going to kind of dissect it so we can use it to trace out the different patterns that we're going to sew on it. So all the little scales and the finger pieces we're going to cut out, and then we're just going to kind of trace around onto the black fabric. You'll probably need a white pencil for this. This works best because then you can just rub it off after you do the sewing. So I got everything drawn out, and now I'm going to take my sewing machine and we're going to sew along all of these lines. This part is going to be a little time consuming. In fact, I actually don't like doing the sewing part of this, but I really enjoy cutting off all the extra fabric at the end. So after you get all those lines sewn, you're going to end up cutting off all the black fabric that is extra, exposing the green that's underneath. Make sure you're very careful not to cut the green fabric. Okay, I got all the extra fabric cut off and I'm really happy with how this looks. The only thing I'm going to do is kind of stuff a portion of the wing to give it a bit more girth so it's not so flat, and then we're just going to have to wait until we're ready to put everything together to add them to the body. So right now that's the last thing that we need to sew, so we're going to move on to making the clay face and feet. Okay, so I kind of want to work on the face first, so before we start on that we need to make our teeth. So we need to make those really long saber teeth. So I'm going to start with a wire for the base of the teeth, and I've got this bent in half and slightly curved. That way they're nice and even and they don't look like just little skewers sticking out of the mouth of the Sabertooth. So what we're going to do to make our teeth is we're going to roll out some strips of clay, and then we're going to taper off one end of each strip. So we're going to take that strip of clay that's slightly tapered and we're going to place it onto the wire and kind of fold it around the wire. Then I'm just going to use my fingers to kind of smooth out that seam that we have on the back of the tooth. I recommend trying to have the back of the tooth where the seam is because it's easier to hide. So we're going to smooth all that out, make sure it's a nice shape, and then we're going to bake these at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 25 minutes. They're going to bake longer when we bake the face, so we don't need to do it a whole lot. We just want it hard enough that way we don't worry about breaking them while we're adding them to the face. And while those are baking, we can start on sculpting the face, and they should be done around the time we're ready to add the teeth to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a lump of tinfoil. I've roughly shaped it into what I want it to look like, and I'm just going to completely cover this in clay. So what I did to figure out the shape of our Sabertooth's head is I kind of googled tigers and lions to kind of get a rough idea of what their head looks like, and I found out a lot of them kind of angle a little downwards, so not a whole lot, but just enough to where it's not like it has a pointed out snout like a wolf. And then the face is also kind of short and wide, and it kind of gets wider around the cheekbones. So I tried to keep to that shape while I was adding clay to get the right shape of the face. Okay, I'm pretty happy with the shape right now, so we're going to start adding the details to it. So I'm going to start with the lips for the mouth. So I'm going to take a little bit of clay and I'm going to push it onto the sides of the face for the cheeks. So I've just got balls of clay and I'm going to kind of smush it, and then we're going to blend it in. And then I'm going to take another ball of clay and use that for the bottom jaw. So we're going to take that, smush it, and then blend it into the rest of the jaw. After I was happy with the shape of the snout, before I added the nose, I decided I wanted to add a bit more cheekbone to it, so I added some more clay right under where we're going to add the eyes. Okay, now I'm going to add the eyes. I'm not going for really wide eyes, but I also don't want little beady eyes, so I tried to kind of stay in the middle of that. So I'm going to take 2 balls of clay that are nice and even, and I'm going to push them into the face where I want the eyes to go. I'm going to make sure they're nice and even, and then we can start adding some strips of clay for the eyelids. For some reason, I like adding the bottom eyelid first. I think it's mainly because there's not a lot of expression, and it's mainly just trying to get the eye positioned in the head. And then a lot of the expression is kind of in the top eyelid. Okay, so our teeth are ready to be added to the face, and our face is ready to have the teeth added to it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I've already cut our teeth apart so the wires are separate, and we're going to just push them into the bottom of the face, kind of right where we think the teeth are going to go. You'll kind of want to try and go in between the lips, but it's okay if it kind of messes them up a little bit. We'll end up straightening that up and fixing it later after we get everything placed. One thing you'll want to do after you place them is you'll want to look at the face from multiple different angles to make sure that it doesn't look wonky from one particular view. Because it may look really good from one point of view, but it could look kind of weird from another. After we're done adding and adjusting the teeth, we're going to end up moving on to adding the nose. So I'm going to take a lump of clay and I'm going to add it to the very end of the snout, just because it looks a little flat and it needs a bit more clay to it. I'm going to smooth that out, and then I'm going to use my tools to make the nostrils and to kind of outline the nose. Now for this piece, I decided that I wanted the ears to be clay as well, so I'm going to take some little balls of clay, I'm going to turn them into some ovals, and then I'm going to smush them onto the side of the face, and then use my tools to blend it in and to kind of outline the ear. Okay, so for the sculpting of the face, these are most of the details that I'm going to add. I'm not going to add a fur texture or anything because I'm going to add fur on top of this later. So I am going to add a little bit more detail to the top because I felt like the head looked a little too plain. So I'm going to give it kind of like a little decorative jewelry piece. So I had this little piece of resin that I've casted earlier. It's got like pieces in it and stuff, and I thought it looked really cool, and it goes along with all the green colors. So I'm going to push that right into the forehead, and then I'm going to start building up clay around it and just adding strips of clay to make it look like a piece of jewelry. Now this resin piece is safe to bake. It's not technically plastic, so it's safe to go in the oven at the temperature that we're going to bake our clay. So you don't have to worry about that. Resin can actually go in the oven with your clay. And then after I'm done with the little decorative jewels, I'm just going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for roughly about 45 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to start on the feet of the Sabertooth. Now one thing, I did have a little trouble with this because I kind of made the paw pads too small, but I did find a way to work around it. Because I originally made a certain size, and then I compared it to the size of the head, and I realized I wanted the feet to be larger. So what we're going to do is we're going to still use these, but we're going to add some clay to it to make the toe pads a little larger. So what I'm going to do is I already have these paw pads baked, so I'm going to add them to the wire frame for the body. I just made a very simple little wire frame, and we're going to add these to the ends of each wire for each leg. After I have those glued into place, we're going to start adding our clay. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start adding clay to the toes. So I'm going to end up adding a ball of clay to each toe and then just kind of blending it into the previous toe pad and just smoothing it out and making it look a little bit larger. So after we're done fixing up the toe pads, we're going to move to the top of the foot and completely cover that in clay. We're going to blend that all together and then we can start adding details to it. So the main detail that I want to add to the top is going to be the claws. So what I'm going to do to make the claws is I'm going to take a tiny strip of clay and I'm going to place it on top of the toe. Then I'm going to use my tools to kind of shape it and blend it in a bit more. So I'm going to do this to all 4 of the feet, and then we're going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 minutes. And then once all of our clay is done baking and is cool to touch, we can start on the painting for it. Okay, so for the painting, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to primer everything black, even the portions that we're going to cover with fur later, mainly because we don't want any white clay peeking through the fur. And this is going to make it look a lot better if we add the black paint first and then put fur over that. Now the part that has the fur, I don't need to do a ton of layers, I'm just going to do like 1 or 2, so it's going to still look kind of blotchy, but when we add the fur to that, we're not going to notice that at all. So after we get everything painted black and dried, we're going to end up moving on to painting the details. So what we need to do is we need to now primer those detail portions. So any part that we're going to end up adding detail to it, because it's going to be a brighter color that we're adding, I'm going to go over it with white. So I'm going to primer the teeth, the eyes, the nose, and then the toe pads. Now honestly, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it is going to help make everything a lot brighter. After all the white paint is dry, we can start adding our colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to have all of our details kind of that neon-y green color, but I also want to make it look kind of like they're glowing. So the first thing I'm going to do after we get the white paint dried is I'm going to go over that with yellow. And then once the yellow has dried, we're going to go around the edges with the green, and then we're going to blend the green into the yellow. So what it's going to do is it's going to make your eyes think that the whole thing is technically green, even though it's not. It's more yellow than green, but because it has that green glow around it, it looks like a glowy green. And then for the teeth, I'm actually going to be leaving those white because I kind of like the contrast. The last little detail that I want to add is I want to add some gold to the piece. So the claws are going to be gold, and then the head piece is going to end up being gold as well. So I'm just going to go over that with a gold modeling paint. So after I'm done with the painting, I'm going to let everything dry nicely, and then we're going to apply a thin layer of resin over everything that's painted with detail. The portion that we want the fur on is not going to get any resin. So we're going to have to let that cure overnight, and then we can start putting our Sabertooth together. Okay, all of our clay pieces are dry and done curing, and we can start putting everything together. So what I'm going to start with first is the wire frame with the feet, and I'm going to run our fabric body over this. So we're just going to take our fabric body and we're going to slide it right over the wire frame. Then we're going to take the fabric pieces for the legs and we're going to start gluing that around the base of the feet. So we're just going to take that, apply some glue. I'm using E6000 and a little hot glue to hold it into place. I'm just going to wrap it around, make sure it's nice and sturdy, and we're going to leave that to dry for a little bit. Once that's dried, we can take our needle and thread and we can sew up the back of the legs and stuff them. Okay, so I've got all the sewing and stuffing for the legs done, and now we're going to add the tail to the piece. So I'm going to take the wire for the tail and then the body of the tail, the fabric piece that we made earlier, and I'm just going to run that over the wire for the tail. Then I'm going to take my needle and thread and sew it to the base of the body. Next, we're going to add the head to the piece. So I'm going to take the wire for the neck and we're going to glue it right into the back of the head. Once that's dried, we can take the fabric for the neck or the mane or whatever you want to call it, and we can start gluing that around the base of the head. So I'm going to glue that all the way around the base of it, and then I'm going to sew down some of the mane. Okay, so we have the tail, the feet, and the head added to the body. Now we need to add the wires for the wings and the wings themselves. So I'm going to take the wires that I have measured for the wings and I'm going to add them to the wire frame. To do this, I'm going to take the spine of our Sabertooth, I'm going to hold that, and I'm going to hold the wires for the wings together, and we're going to start wrapping that with a thinner wire. After that's all wrapped together, we can then slide our wings over the wires for them, and then we can start sewing them into place on the body. Once we have the wings sewn into place, all we need to do now is finish stuffing the rest of the body and closing it up. Okay, so our body is completely put together and now we need to finish up the last of the details. So what we're going to do is we're going to start furring the face and the tops of the feet. So I'm going to take my E6000 glue and I'm going to apply it over the face where I want the fur to be. So I'm going to start with the green fur fabric to kind of add to the mane, and then we're going to move on to adding the black fur fabric. So all I have right here is just little fur trimmings, and I'm just going to push it into the glue, and I'm going to make sure that it's nice and pushed into the glue so that it doesn't fall off once the glue is dried. Some of it probably will, so you will want to brush it after you've glued it to find out if you need to add any more. So we're going to get our face completely covered in fur along with the tops of our feet. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we can use some paints to kind of adjust it and add some highlights to it. And then we're just going to let that dry, and then we're pretty much done. Okay guys, and that's how I made a dark magic Sabertooth. I had so much fun with him. I'm gonna have him with a lot of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so make sure to check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!